we spend the hour with the legendary author, poet, activist Alice Walker. She's the first African-American woman to be awarded the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. She won it in 1983 for her renowned novel, The Color Purple. The novel also won the National Book Award for fiction and was later adapted into a film and musical by the same name. On the 30th anniversary of the book's publication, we'll talk about its lasting legacy. Set mainly in rural Georgia in the 1930s, the book tells the story of a young, poor African-American woman named Celie and her struggle for empowerment in a world marked by sexism, racism, and patriarchy. In 1985, The Color Purple was adapted into a film directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Whoopi Goldberg, Danny Glover, Oprah Winfrey. In this clip from the film, two of the main characters have a tense exchange. A strong, independent woman named Sofia tells long-abused Celie that she's struggled all her life and won't let anyone beat her down.
All my life I had to fight. I had to fight my daddy. I had to fight my uncles. I had to fight my brothers. Girl child ain't safe in the family names. But I ain't never thought I had to fight in my own house. I love Hoppo. God knows I do. But I kill him dead before I let him beat me. And that's a hoof print. Did you remember the hoof print, Depo?
No, that looked like a fist print.
No, sir. No, sir. They don't fist touch my face. No, sir. Now, you want a dead son-in-law, Miss Celie? You keep on advising him like you doing.
As the novel it's based on celebrates the 30th anniversary, we're joined now by the renowned author Alice Walker herself to further discuss its legacy. We'll also speak to her about other writings, her social and political activism in support of the Palestinians, and about the coming presidential election. Alice Walker, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you so much.
It's great to be with you. You were yesterday before a crowd of about 1,200 people in the audience at the Fall for the Book Festival in Arlington, Virginia. You read from The Color Purple. You talked about its importance. Tell us, on this 30th anniversary this year, your thoughts about what brought you to write this seminal work.
Actually, I wanted to spend more time with my grandparents, and they had died, long ago. And my parents, and so I set out to write a book in which I could really live for a year or two and be with them by creating characters who resembled them and by giving them a life that they might have had that, in fact, many of them did not have.
For especially young people who may not have, definitely they've probably heard of The Color Purple, but may not have read it, just lay out the story for us.
Well, the story is about Celie, and who was abused by her stepfather. She lost her own father, who was lynched, and this is part of the story that is rarely talked about, that her own father was lynched because he was so successful as a businessman in the South, when black people were not supposed to be successful. And then she became the victim of her stepfather and raped, and she had two children who were taken away from her and ended up in Africa with her sister, who had gone there as a missionary's helper. It basically is the struggle of someone who thinks she has no voice and has no place and writes letters to God because she has nobody else to write to. And then she discovers that the God that she's writing to is deaf, because he's basically the Christian God that has been imposed on black people. And at that point, she starts writing to her sister, and eventually she understands that divinity is all around us and that we are a part of it, and it's in nature.
I want to turn to another clip from the film, The Color Purple. In this scene, Celie finally stands up to her husband, who goes simply by the name Mr.
Until you do right by me, everything you think about is gonna crumble. Don't do it, Miss Celie. Don't trade places with what I've been through. Come on, Miss Celie. Let's go to the car. He ain't worth it. He ain't
worth it. Who you think you is? You can't curse nobody. Look at you. You're black, you're poor, you're ugly, you're a woman, you're nothing at all.
Till you do right by me, everything you even think about gonna fail.
There you have it. That scene. Describe it for our listeners and viewers, Alice Walker.
Well, it's a scene in which Celie basically curses Mr. and all the misters in the world and says to them, until you do right by me, meaning herself as a person, but also me as the earth, everything you do will crumble and everything you do will fail. And it's prophetic in that sense. And she somehow knows this. It comes very strongly through her that this is true. That unless people are doing right by the poor of the world, by the downtrodden, and by women generally, they are doomed. Our culture, our society, our world is doomed.
And then you've got the amazing Shug Avery. I want to ask you about the title of your novel. But first, let's go to Shug, who mentions the color purple in her conversation with Celie.
For more than anything, God loves admiration.
You saying God is vain?
No, not vain. Just wanting to share a good thing. I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field and don't notice it.
Well, you saying it just want to be loved like it say in the Bible?
Yeah, Celie. Everything want to be loved. Us sing and dance and holler. Just trying to be loved.
Shug talking to Celie, Alice.
Yes, and she's explaining to Celie that, the beauty of nature is what reminds us of what is divine. I mean, that we're already in heaven, really. It's just that we haven't noticed it, and we've been diverted by people who want us to believe whatever it is they're basically selling us. But if you pass by the color purple in a field and you don't even notice it, why should you even be here on the planet? I mean, you should notice what is here, because it is wonderful and amazing and loves you back by its beauty and by its fragrance, or however it can love you back.
And how did that title come to you, The Color Purple?
Because when I was writing the novel, I lived way in the country in Boonville, California, and I went walking through the redwoods and swimming in the river and noticed that in nature, purple is everywhere. And it's interesting because we tend to think that in nature you would see more red, yellow, white, all of those colors, but actually purple is right there. And in that sense, it's like the people in the novel. You think that they are unusual, that what's happening to them is unusual, but actually it's happening somewhere on your block almost every minute. All the trouble, all of the trials and tribulations of Celie are happening to people all over the planet right now.
So this book came out 30 years ago.
It did.
And talk about how it changed your life. What had you been doing before, and what happened after?
I live a very secluded life, a very contemplative life, and a very meditative one. That is my ideal life. And the notoriety of the color purple, and there was a lot of that as well as, everything else, caused me to feel much more exposed and to have many more demands. When this happened, I didn't even have an assistant to help me do anything, and so I would handle all of my affairs, including my taxes, by myself. And when all of this happened, a lot of mail and stuff came to my house, and I just put it in a room and closed the door on it for many months until I realized that I couldn't actually do that, and I finally got someone to help me. Some of the things are good. Most of the things are very good, but I think that kind of fame that happens in America is actually very destructive unless you can fortify yourself by whatever practice you can find. Meditation helped me a lot.
Pulitzer Prize, first African-American woman to win it for fiction. How did you feel? Where were you when you heard?
I was living in San Francisco, and I thought it was a joke. I had won the National Book Award, I think the week before, and then someone called and said that there was the Pulitzer, which I didn't know existed for fiction. And it was nice. I mean, I think, I have this thing about prizes, though. I'm suspicious of them. And I think also that they should be delivered to you. They should be brought to your door with flowers and maybe with a violin playing. But that you should never have to leave home to get an award.
We're going to break and then come back to this discussion. We're talking with the legendary author, Alice Walker. Stay with us.
Ain't got no home, ain't got no...
democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We're on the road in Washington, D.C. on our 100-city election 2012 tour, headed to Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guest is the author, the activist, the artist, Alice Walker. 30 years ago, her book, The Color Purple, came out. In this clip of the film made by Steven Spielberg, the character Sofia, played by Oprah Winfrey, defies Miss Millie, the wife of the town's mayor, by telling her she won't be her maid.
Children are so clean. Would you like to work for me? Be my maid? Hell no. What did you say?
Hell no.
What did she say?
Hey, can't you pump that crude a little faster?
Gail, what did you say to Miss Millie?
I said hell.
Oh, Miss Sophia.
No, Miss Sophia, no!
Alice Walker, why don't you describe what happened to Sofia as she's told the mayor's wife she wouldn't work for her as a maid, what the mayor did?
Well, the mayor basically assaults her, and she ends up being their maid after all, because in that time there was something called contract labor, so that if you really wanted a black person to be a servant, you could have them arrested, and then they could be released into your care, in basically your service, and be your personal prisoner. So this is what happened to Sofia.
What happened when Steven Spielberg approached you? Did you know him?
Not at all. I'd never heard of Steven, and my daughter took me to see E.T. so that I could be prepared, and I loved E.T. And when Steven appeared himself, I really loved him as well. He was very open, knew what he was about, wanted very much to do this film. And we collaborated as much as possible. And I think we both feel very pleased, although in the beginning I didn't like the film because it just felt so outlandish. It's very weird having a book of yours made into a film. Everything looks like a cartoon, but I got used to it. When I saw it in a theater with lots of people. The first time I saw it, there were only 3 people, me and my partner and a friend, in a huge theater that they had hired just to show me the film, and it was strange.
It was nominated for something, 11 Oscars?
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't win one.
No, it didn't win any Oscars, and I felt fine about it because I didn't know any of the people who were making the decision not to give the awards. And I distrust not knowing, I distrust this part of it, that it's better if you know the people who are deciding something so important. And I think, for instance, there were no people of color making the decision. And I don't think any women of any shade.
And then it went and became a musical in New York.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it became a really wonderful musical. Some of the things I had wanted more of in the film, we were able to put into the musical.
Which was?
Development of the relationship between Celie and Shug, which is so precious and beautiful in the musical.
Talk about that relationship.
Well, they have a love relationship. They fall in love with each other. Celie is enamored of Shug even before she meets her. She sees a photograph that Mr. has, because Mr. is Shug's lover, has been, and the father of some of Shug's children, actually. They have a very long-term love affair. And Celie, has never been loved by anyone except her sister Nettie, who ends up being sent off to Africa. So the relationship that they have really develops Celie's sense of herself as a person, a real person, instead of a drudge.
The world has now seen this movie and read your book. People all over the world. What is the response internationally? How do people talk about this as a global story?
Well, everybody seems to understand that it is a global story. I was talking yesterday to the people in Georgetown, George Mason University, about how when I went to China in 1983, just after the book was published, it was already a bestseller in China. They didn't tell me about it, but it was. And so I said to them, well, why do people respond so deeply to this novel? And they said to me, well, Alice, it's a very Chinese story, because the oppression of women is global. It's not just, in the black community. And I felt badly that many black people, I think, felt that I was saying that it was, our problem. But I think nowadays...
Black male violence.
Yes, the critics. But I think now people understand that the suppression of women and the abuse of children, all of these things are global issues.